Good evening. My name is Richard Klein, and I would like to thank you for attending this presentation on stormwater controls, what's working and what's not. I'd also like to thank the Severn River Association for making this presentation possible. Let me tell you a little bit about myself before we get into the presentation. In my day job, I help people all over the U.S. with a variety of issues that might threaten a neighborhood or the environment. Those issues include things like making neighborhood streets safer, preventing development from causing school overcrowding, and of course protecting aquatic resources from the impacts of development. Each of the red dots that you see in this map is a different location in the U.S. where we've helped people to achieve those goals. These are the four topics that I'm going to cover in this 25-minute presentation. After each topic, we'll take 5 minutes or so of questions so I can clear up any confusion I may have created. The first topic, construction site mud pollution, followed by post-construction stormwater pollution. Third, we'll take a look at how we can prevent past compliance problems from being repeated in the future. And finally, why audits are the best way to accelerate Severn River restoration. First, for construction sites. They're the single largest source of muddy water like that which made this creek so unpleasant looking. Most of the muddiness that you see in construction site runoff is due to clay particles and finer silt as well. As you can see, the clay particles are extremely small. There are two basic approaches to controlling the sediment impacts of construction sites. The first is sediment control, which consists of measures along the perimeter of a site, such as the black silt fence that you see here, or ponds on the periphery, such as the sediment trap. Trouble is, sediment control measures alone do not trap clay that makes nearby creeks so muddy. It's only through erosion control that goal can be achieved. And erosion control consists mostly of straw mulch, as well as planting grass on portions of a construction site that aren't going to be disturbed for a while. This graph compares the different control approaches with the effectiveness in preventing the runoff of muddy water from a construction sites. With no controls, you get a great deal of muddiness. With sediment controls alone, you make some reduction in the muddiness, but not nearly what's needed to fully protect aquatic resources based upon this river protection standard. Straw mulch, stone, and something known as PAM, polyacrylamide, get you much closer to the goal, but still releases a fair bit of muddy water. However, if you can protect exposed soil with a thick layer of grass, you can get well below that standard and generate very clear runoff. So there are two concepts that are key to understanding how you can gain more of the benefits of construction activity and fewer of the negative effects. The first key concept is that most of the pollution from construction site occurs during the worst storms, and the sheer volume of runoff from those storms overwhelms perimeter controls, as you see here with this muddy water overflowing the silt fence. The second key concept is that it takes clay weeks or even months to settle from suspension. So frequently between storms, ponds look like this. They look very muddy. Then another storm occurs, and the runoff that comes from that storm pushes this muddy water out into a nearby waterway. So perimeter ponds alone are not enough to protect downstream waters from the muddiness caused by construction. It's only through erosion control that we can come close to preventing muddy water release. Most erosion control begins with something called hydroseeding, where mulch, fertilizer, and grass seed is applied at once in a water slurry. With mulch, you have to put enough mulch down so you can't see soil through the mulch. And if you achieve that goal, you reduce runoff volume by 60% and erosion by 90%. Grass reduces erosion by 99% or more. And for roads and parking lot beds, that's covered with 4 inches of stone. And that's pretty effective control for road beds and parking lots. Law requires the use of erosion control whenever earth moving ends on a construction site, and earth moving usually ends after the first 2 weeks of site clearance. And you know that earth moving has ended if you see that they've begun building roads and homes and other structures on the site. You can't build these structures until earth moving has brought the site up to rough grade. So back in 2014 and 2015, more than 100 volunteers assessed erosion control quality on 225 sites in the greater Baltimore region. Here you see Lynn Rockenbaugh assessing a site in Arundel County. Unfortunately, the 2014 survey found that compliance with erosion control laws was pretty poor. Overall, it was 23% throughout the region. In Arundel County, compliance was only 16%. Fortunately, the publicity that was generated by the 2014 survey provided elected officials with the public support they needed to improve compliance 61% overall for the region. And in Arundel County, compliance went from 16% to 40%, more than double. So if we can get this simple message out to the general public, I think that it could go a long way towards greatly increasing voluntary compliance with erosion control laws. And the message is simply this: whenever you see exposed soil on a construction site, you can assume that a nearby waterway is going to be polluted come the next storm. If you also see that earth moving is ended, as evidenced by road or building construction, you're seeing a violation of the law as well. I'll be handing out this palm card, both of these, this one done by Brad Knopf of the Magothy River Association, a little bit later. Again, I think that if we could get this concept across to the general public, we'd go a long way towards ending construction site mud pollution. Now let's stop for a few minutes for a few questions. Okay, let's begin again. Now we're going to talk about post-construction stormwater, and that's the largest source of pollution for the Severn River, and frankly most other suburban urban waters in the U.S. And the polluted stormwater comes from highways, the neighborhoods we live in, both our lawns and our homes and our driveways and the streets they're located on, as well as where we work and shop. These are the three big pollutants for the Chesapeake Bay: nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. They're also the three big pollutants for the Severn River and most other suburban urban waterways. I'm going to use nitrogen as a conversation piece to talk about stormwater best management practices. This graph from the Chesapeake Bay program model shows that more than half of all the nitrogen comes in stormwater from developed land. These are the six most common types of stormwater best management practices, BMPs, that are used to trap runoff pollutants before they can reach a waterway. In the Severn River watershed, more than a third of all the existing developed land drains to more than 2,000 stormwater BMPs. So these BMPs could be keeping a tremendous amount of pollution out of the river. BMP effectiveness varies with BMP type. As you can see, dry ponds are the least effective. They trap essentially no nitrogen. Wet ponds trap about a fifth of the nitrogen. Sand filters a little bit better. But the most effective practices are infiltration and bioretention. And I call these two categories of practices highly effective BMPs. So when a developer first constructs a stormwater BMP, they're required to sign an agreement like this one, which says that they will maintain the BMP in good working order. And this agreement applies not only to the original owner, but all subsequent owners as well. This state law requires that the county inspect each BMP for maintenance needs at least once every 3 years. And the good news is that 90% of BMP owners maintain the BMP voluntarily. The bad news is that first they got to be made aware of the fact that the BMP needs maintenance. And while it may be obvious to you what a BMP needs maintenance by the end of this presentation, it's not so obvious to the folks who own these things. I suspect many of them don't even know that there's a BMP that they're responsible for. So assessing BMPs is actually pretty simple. Here you see an infiltration trench. This is a stone-filled trench that captures runoff from this highway. This is Maryland 3 in the Severn watershed. The runoff is stored in the interstices of stones within the trench, and the trench might be 6 to 20 feet deep. And slowly the stored runoff then percolates through the soil, and there you get 80 to 95% removal of stormwater pollutants. Infiltration trenches are the most common stormwater BMP in Arundel County and the Severn watershed. There are about 6,000 of these things countywide, and they account for a fourth of all BMPs. So infiltration trenches, as well as other infiltration measures and bioretention, they have to drain completely within 48 hours after a storm occurs. So if you see standing water in a infiltration trench and more than 2 days have passed since the last storm event, the trench is failing. That's also true if you see wetland vegetation growing in it. It's definitely failed. So essentially no pollutants are being trapped by this infiltration trench. Instead, everything's just sort of spilling over into a nearby waterway. Bioretention, one of the most common BMPs on new development sites, also called rain gardens. Runoff from this parking lot flows into this bioretention area, and it's stored below the storm drain inlet, so it can slowly soak down through the filter media, where 80 to 95% of the stormwater pollutants are removed by the filter media. Then it flows into the underlying soils. Like infiltration trenches and all other infiltration measures, if you see standing water in a bioretention facility and more than 2 days have passed since the last rain, the bioretention facility is probably failing. Same is true if you see wetland vegetation growing in the BMP. Wet ponds are pretty easy to evaluate too. Here you see a typical brand new wet pond. And over time, if wet ponds are doing their job, they trap sediment, and then wetland vegetation colonizes the sediment. And when the surface area of the wet pond has been reduced by 10% or more, then it has to be cleaned. So you can assess most BMPs from adjoining public areas. There's rarely need to trespass, so that's not a worry. And we've generated these fact sheets for each of the different types of BMPs that explain in pretty simple language not only what the benefits are of each BMP type and how they can improve neighborhood quality of life if they're well maintained, but also easy things to look for to assess whether or not the BMP needs maintenance. We also have this fact sheet on the left that explains how to find BMPs. But an easier way is to use the Maryland Department of the Environment Stormwater print webpage shown on the right. And here we see a stormwater printout of BMPs in the area where we're at now. This is Union Jacks, and each of these blue dots is a stormwater BMP. In fact, this BMP, which is a micro bioretention facility, serving the AAA office, it's located 50 feet that way. So let's take a few more questions and then we'll go on to the final topic. Okay, thank you. So as you can see, BMPs could be keeping a tremendous amount of pollution out of the Severn, but the key question is, are they? If past history is any indication, we can't assume that that's the case. In 2011, we did this audit that you see on the right. I volunteered about 800 hours to the Severn River Association to put this audit together, and unfortunately I found that in 2011, half the BMPs we looked at in the Severn watershed were failing. Fortunately, by 2015, the percentage of failing BMPs was cut in half, from 50% down to 25%. The big question, though, is, are the BMP failures rising once again? So to answer that question, first we need to understand what caused the 50% BMP failure rate. And the reason why we need to understand that is so we can prevent recurrences. So it all began in 2001 when the county reduced its stormwater inspection staff from 6 full-time inspectors to just 1 appalling yes. And after 10 years of too few inspections, 50% of the Severn watershed stormwater BMPs were failing, and that was probably true countywide. Fortunately, in 2012, the Severn River Association and 8 other groups wrote this letter to County Executive Leopold, and this letter and other actions resulted in the county restoring stormwater BMP inspection staff to the 6 inspectors that existed in 2011. In 2015, the Greater Baltimore Stormwater BMP audit was carried out. It was carried out in the city and the 5 surrounding counties, including Anne Arundel. On the left, you see the report, and a copy that is circulating among you. And this survey was carried out by 42 volunteers from 42 watershed groups who assessed 331 BMPs region-wide. So, the 2015 audit revealed that the restored inspection staff had succeeded in reducing the BMP failure rate in Anne Arundel County from 50% in 2011 to 25% by 2015. So this stuff really, really works. So the key thing to understand, though, is why the BMP failures occurred in the first place. And I think it was because no one had a complete picture of what was going on with stormwater BMP inspection and maintenance in Anne Arundel County or throughout the region. And the reason why no one had a complete picture was due to these 5 factors. First of all, stormwater BMP assessment takes some training. It's not rocket science, but you need some training to understand how to assess a BMP. Unfortunately, no one provides training that's oriented towards volunteers. The few folks who had the knowledge needed to assess BMPs were focusing on a relatively small part of the county, one watershed or one small area of a watershed. So no one really knew that the countywide failure rate was escalating. And because no one knew, there was no one aware of the staffing cut, much less advocating for restored staffing and the other things it takes to operate an effective countywide BMP inspection and maintenance program. Let's stop and take a few more questions. Okay, now for the last topic, why audits are the best way to accelerate river restoration. These are the 3 basic options for improving river protection. You can report compliance problems site by site. You can threaten to sue contractors or agencies when the compliance isn't improved on site, or you can hold elected officials accountable for improving compliance throughout a watershed or a county. So legal action can help, but it's frequently not enough. There are a number of things about legal action that make it difficult to apply and restricts the ability to win the sweeping changes that audits can bring about. So reporting problems site by site isn't enough either. The site that you see here is Chelsea Court, located in Montgomery County. Sorry about that. The Friends of Sligo Creek paid me $6,000 to inspect this site weekly for about a year, with a goal of trying to improve erosion and sediment control quality. And all modesty aside, I think that if anyone was going to achieve maximum protection on a construction site, it would probably be somebody like me. And Montgomery County is frankly one of the more responsive counties in the state to these environmental concerns. But I spent a lot of time working with the inspector, the inspector's boss, and the contractors on the site, trying to get them to do a better job of both sediment and erosion control. Got great sediment control, as you see here, with all the super silt fence, but the erosion control, we never really came close to achieving what was needed to protect Sligo Creek. So just reporting problems site by site, it helps a little, but it gets you nowhere near what's needed to prevent mud pollution. So the problem is that inspectors and compliance chief, they don't set budgets, nor do they set enforcement priorities. And by that I mean that they don't determine how many inspectors they have and how frequently they can get out to the sites, nor do they determine how aggressively sediment and erosion control laws are going to be enforced. These are the folks that do. here we see County Executive Shue and the Arundel County Council. These are the folks that set budgets and ultimately enforcement priorities. So to improve compliance, we have to hold elected officials publicly accountable. And we do that through things like the article that you see on the left about the stormwater BMP inspection and maintenance problem. And here are the things that it takes to gain the full benefits of audits. The audits have to be repeated annually. The results have to be publicized as widely as possible. And the results have to make it clear that it's elected officials who are responsible for successes and responsible for not so good compliance. But everything needs to be couched in a constructive tone. It's not enough to say that the county executive and the county council are not enforcing clean water laws the way they should be. It has to be couched in terms like, we know that the county executive and the council want to do a better job in protecting our waters. And here are specific things that we think that they can do that would achieve that better protection. And we know that in order for them to take these steps, they need our support. So we pledge the support of our organization and our thousands of members in supporting the county executive and the council as they begin to implement these improvements. So the last thing I'd like to talk about is what I think could be a pretty effective way in dramatically improving public support for Severn River restoration. In fact, I think it increased support by tenfold. I think there's about 100,000 people who live in the Severn watershed, but only a fraction live on or near the river. Most, perhaps 90%, live far from the river. They don't see it, they have no access to it, so restoring the Severn isn't at the top of their priority list the way it might be for you. Fortunately, most Severn River watershed homes are within a 5-minute walk of a tributary to Severn. It may be a stream, creek, or some other waterway. Here we see the headwaters of Severn Run in the Odenton area and a tributary to it. Here we see lots and lots of houses in the immediate vicinity. In fact, all of these houses are within a 5-minute walk of either the main stem of Severn Run, this lake, which is a stormwater pond, or this unnamed tributary. So on the left, you see pictures of what a Severn River watershed neighborhood stream should look like. It should look nice and clear and clean, safe enough for a kid to play in. There should be lots of fish and other critters in the stream to fascinate this kid and her parents. Unfortunately, this is what most Severn River watershed neighborhood streams actually look like. They don't look like something you'd want your kid playing in, and there's very little aquatic life in the stream for the kid to go after anyway. So here's why, and that's why distant residents would support Severn River restoration, and that's because the same practices that would restore the Severn will restore their neighborhood waters as well. So making Severn River restoration a truly watershed-wide effort could expand public support for restoring the river and her tributaries by tenfold. And this fact sheet is one of the techniques that we've developed for making the first approach to watershed residents to help them understand that their neighborhood waters could be great recreational resources for them and their children, but that we got to solve some problems first before those waters may be truly fit for our children to play in. So I'd like to leave you with this quote from Wendell Phillips, and of course this quote is also applicable to achieving a cleaner Severn River. The fact sheets and other publications that I mentioned, they could be downloaded from our Watershed Audits webpage, and here's the web address for the webpage. You can download this presentation by clicking on this text, the fact sheets and other guidance documents by clicking this text. This will take you to a number of YouTube narrated presentations on evaluating stormwater BMPs, construction sites, and other sources of river degradation. And finally, you can download our Severn River Watershed Audit by clicking on this text. And for additional information on exposed soil equals pollution, the website on the left, and for information on the overall effects of development on aquatic resources and how we can get more of the benefits of development with fewer adverse effects, go to this web page. And these two web pages explain how we're helping 90% of our clients resolve their concerns. And a lot of these successes are occurring without having to hire lawyers. And in the few situations where we need to hire an attorney, the expense of those attorneys is reduced dramatically compared to the conventional approach of dealing with development. Thank you for your time.